Welcome to the sarcophagus, a structure described as a cosmic uterus housing a fetal demon known as Ultros. Plentiful with organic life, plant and animal alike, it is said to be within a black hole from which no one returns, yet many attempt to find. Before I begin, I want to thank SEG314 on Reddit for his thorough interpretation of the lore. It is quite a fascinating read, and while I have come to some different conclusions, they put forward a valid interpretation and it will be linked in the description. Let's take a trip into the events of the game, the themes present in the narrative, the nature of the Ultros Entity, and what you, the human watching this video and playing the game, have to do with any of this. The narrative begins well before the events of the game on a planet known as Berian. The planet is inhabited by a society of people that are intimately connected with nature. We can see in the digital art book for the game that the Berians are quite literally composed of what I believe to be a combination of synthetic, plant, and fungal matter, with tendrils and branching structures appearing to make up their complexion and biology. It is very heavily implied through artwork and game mechanics that the player character, Ouja, is a Berian. The Berians practiced oneness with nature through many means, but they were not afraid of technology. In fact, they seemed to be thriving technologically, akin to the level of humans or even more advanced. However, not yet a spacefaring race. Their technology, like themselves, seems to be infused with plant and fungal material, what we call wetware here on Earth. As a quick aside, there are real-life scientists working right now on fungus-infused circuit boards in the hopes that they can create a supercomputer, using the vast amount of connections that fungus make with their hyphae. The history of the Berians is partially relayed through healed memories. These are unlocked after connecting a shaman to the living network. More on that in a second. These, combined with a number of small mushroom-like growths called amnemion that relay a message through a vision, paint us a picture of what happened in the past. One of these amnemion read, "Scientifically driven to an extent, the spirit of Beria bows first and foremost towards the naturalistic culture resembling paganism, where the Shamazal stand as central figures. They cleanse the Berians' dark thoughts through arcane rituals involving the drinking of teas, smoking various plants, and hypnosis. Then the extracted darkness is held contained within their own mind temple." More evidence of their mycorrhizal nature. Mycorrhizal being an adjective that describes the symbiosis of plants and fungi, is an item you discover that allows you to retain unlocked cortex abilities even through a time loop, known as a mnemonic mycelium, which is described that while you sleep, the mycelium can attach itself to a cortex memory and allow it to persist over loops. During the regenerative phase, the mnemonic mycelium creates an appendix to the main gilding tunnel leading to the damaged axions, coated with mnemonic foam originating from an irregularity in the myelin protein. The appendix releases a cloud of nanoparticles that penetrates the hippocampus. Mycelium is the term for the structures of a fungus that intertwine with a plant's roots, allowing facilitation of nutrients and chemical signals from plant to plant. This establishes the botanical nature of the Berians and their ability to integrate fungi into their bodily functions. There is also the dialogue spoken when a new time loop is initiated. Originally thought to be coming from the Ultros Entity, I now interpret it as coming from the remaining shamans. It says, "The cycle begins anew. Let our quiet mycelium lament the unrest and return to what once was." Due to their mycorrhizal heritage, they can connect to their technology and plant life through something they call the living network. Certain plants that were cared for by the Berians will sprout what I call a network bud, and these harbor tiny insects that foster the connection between not only these plants, but also the Berians' technology. This behaves very much like pollination, and given the plant-like nature of the Berians, this explains why the insects are also attracted to the player. Since there is no mention of them inventing the living network while on the sarcophagus, I believe that this is a part of their culture that precedes the arrival of the Ultros Entity. The Shaman used rituals and a device known as the Teneba Caligarum to absorb into themselves the negative thoughts and emotions from the Berian people. Let's return to the Enemion we discussed earlier. Scientifically driven to an extent, the spirit of Beria bows first and foremost towards a naturalistic culture resembling paganism, where the Shamazal stand as central figures. They cleanse the Berians' dark thoughts, and through arcane rituals involving drinking of traditional teas, smoking various plants, and hypnosis. Then the extracted darkness is held contained within their own mind temple. Being a shaman is an honorable vocation and carries high respect among the Berians. Alas, strain, rot, and corruption of the mind soon follow, as there is no way of ridding themselves of what's rooted through the extraction. It is evidenced by the message above that this is an arduous, if not destructive, process for the shamans. This device is known to us in-game as the Extractor. At an unknown point in the past, a falling star crashed onto the surface of Beria. This account is relayed by one of the Amnemions. Above me, it appeared in the sky, this phenomenon, embellished like an unusually large star, falling to reach the Berian surface. Cutting deep into Beria's dust, the remnants of a derelict vessel soon gained the attention of a selected group of the planet's inhabitants. Floating above the vessel, a bubbling sphere ascended, oozing and emanating a peculiar light. They stood in awe. This is the first time the Berians made contact with something they called the Entity. There is a healed memory depicting this, however it portrays a humanoid figure, very similar to Ouja the player character, falling to the surface rather than a space vessel. This could just be an artist rendition, an error in memory, or perhaps the humanoid fell just before or after the vessel. No matter, as the introduction of the Entity fundamentally changed Berian culture. They believed it to be some kind of consciousness, and in reverence and curiosity built a capsule around the Entity and a temple in close proximity. Yet others believed it to be the herald of their doom, or the end of all things. This is relayed to us through more of the Amnemions. Wanting to be free of their burden of harboring the civilization's dark thoughts and energies, the Shamazal then began to use the Extractor to transfer the dark energy into the Entity itself. It appears they believed the Entity to be so great a mind, so powerful in its omniscience, that it could harbor the dark energy within itself ad infinitum. Their minds free of their torment, the Shamazal ushered in a new age of abundance to the Berian civilization. Technology and spirituality grew and the Berians flourished, eventually becoming a spacefaring race who spread their influence among the stars. They greatly expanded the temple, creating many of the other areas that we see in the game. Eventually, the Shamazal decided to leave Beria, joining the great expansion into space. They renamed the temple and its peripheries the Sarcophagus, and began their voyage. We know that at least one area, Infinity Lake, was built during their travels throughout the cosmos, because apparently it is still an arduous process to absorb the negative thoughts of the Berian people and transpose them into the Entity. Two Amnemions, read together, recount, as the extraction of darkness took a toll on their body, The Shamazal established a bathing place for leisure and rest. Here, they got some respite from the procedures and could balance their Tenebra Caligarum. Oh, the burden of the Shamazal. Other Berian factions on board the sarcophagus soon found their way to Infinity Lake. They urged for more resources to be funneled into expanding the area, as they felt this was their sole reward for their hard work. The Shamazal reluctantly agreed to share the enjoyment of the facilities, realizing that they could be on the brink of mutiny. However, all the while, the entity was not simply storing the dark energy that the Shamazal had infused into it. We learn that, filling the entity with the dark thoughts of the entire Berian race, a seeping darkness was unavoidable. Thus, a vicious cycle was established, creating an ever-growing need for spiritual release. The extraction of dark thoughts was unloaded into the entity and clandestinely sent back into the minds of the Berians. The third eye will shine from the Chokmah of Ein Sof. Ein Sof, forgive if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, is a Hebrew term translating to infinite or unending, but in the Kabbalah belief system, it is generally used to refer to God before the act of creation, after which he names himself Yahweh. Chokmah is a Hebrew word for wisdom, so the last line can be interpreted as, "The third eye will shine from the wisdom of the infinite God." This will be relevant later. Thus, over time, with the entity clandestinely sending the dark thoughts back into the Berian population, the civilization began to decline. This is relayed to us by a healed memory depicting a ravaged and dismembered Berian. As the civilization fell and the entity continued to change, the Berian people began to go extinct, and soon those on board the sarcophagus were the only remnants. It became apparent that the entity was growing, changing, and was about to be birthed into a new form, now fully corrupted by all that the Shamazal had infused into it. And there was no way for them to stop this from happening. Certain parts of the ship were to be corrupted. The orchard, once a fertile area used for cultivating crops, fell to the entity's dark influence. A worm found its way into what is described as psionic compost and began to grow massively in size and appetite. An mnemonium found in the orchard reads, "The worm instructed the farmers to grow plants on a larger scale than before and tie the harvest back to it. In return, it would nurture their soils beyond current standards and bring forth delicious fruits and bountiful harvests. Soon, every orchard farmer has become involved in the zealous undertaking." Enthusiasm turned into macaw worship, and the worm, growing fat from the fruit, exuded pheromones to keep its congregation busy and calm. With the influx of dark thoughts to the entity, the worm got panged with a surge of anxiety and anger. Its gluttonous spree didn't stop at mere fruit. Once it had tasted flesh, there was no turning back. The worm now emitted such a potent and strong pheromone that it turned its subjects into mindless, ravenous grubs. And so, the angry, feastrous worm became king of a ruined kingdom. And thus the Berian farmers were transformed into the creatures we know them as, the Knoppers. Another section of the ship, a laboratory known as the Pantheon of the Stars, faced a different outcome. Searching for a way to permanently contain the entity, they created many experiments in hopes of finding some clues to aid them. Dismayed by the lack of progress and by the decline of the Berian people, the scientists decided to let one of these creations be merged with the Shaman pod that is located in this sector, in an effort to feed it more knowledge and information, as the Shaman's incubator would be the most direct source of knowledge regarding the entity. An mnemonium found in the Pantheon states that, "My body is rotting. My mind is weary. Can we contain the demon? Can I? We all stand with Beria, so why not let spirit and science work together? Let our knowledge merge through this tissue. People stopped coming to the temple for worshipping. What made their behavior change? Threading the electrode-studded stents through the blood vessels leading to the brain, we connect the tissue to the equipment of science. It needs more data, craves it, tries to merge with the incubator, like a parasite wanting independence, becoming a host. This gave birth to the creature known as the Host, whom we face in the game. Obsessed with data, it forces all denizens of the sarcophagus who wander into its domain to endure a series of games and trials on penalty of death. It seems that its goal has been completely forgotten, now only craving the data it pulls from spectating on these gruesome games, seemingly without end. Eventually, the shamans, finally faced with what their actions had done to their people, made an ultimate sacrifice. They would lie in stasis within incubators and channel their remaining energies into keeping the entity, now dubbed Ultros, contained. They even initiated a failsafe, for if anyone were to try and awaken Ultros, the remaining shaman could expend their psionic energy and warp the space-time continuum, resetting events to the time just before the entity was awakened. They left a single remaining Berian, Qualia, with the responsibility of initiating this reset if the need ever arose. Before we move on, if you like what I'm doing, I would greatly appreciate it if you gave this video a thumbs up and maybe even subscribed. This is a very small channel, and at the moment, every interaction counts. Of course, if you think I'm wrong or have interpreted things differently, don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Now, let's continue. Eventually, the sarcophagus and the Berian culture at large faded into obscurity and legend. Tales of a black hole wandering about the cosmos, containing a powerful demon and harboring ruins of a great civilization, were all that remained of the Berians' legacy. Several travelers originating from separate cultures found their way to the sarcophagus for one reason or another, and they are the people we meet throughout the game. Each of them settled on the sarcophagus in separate domains, their minds being warped by Ultros to varying degrees. Some, like Gardner and Brunson, have embraced their new home. Others, such as Vasa and Wallet, are seeking a way to escape, having negative effects on the ship in the process. I will explore some characters in the theory section, but Vasa the Huntress definitively took action in a way that further doomed the sarcophagus. She arrived at the sarcophagus to search for a way to reclaim her honor, and she thought that by hunting this so-called demon that she could do so. In her desperation and disdain for the creatures she found on board, she severed the living network's connections, thinking these small network insects to be pests. This effectively crippled the sarcophagus and severed Ultros' direct connection to the shamans. An untold amount of time passed after each of the alien residents had arrived, and we finally come to the events of the game. I will summarize the general beats of the game, as it is ultimately up to the player to decide what the ending of the story becomes. Ouja, the player, wakes up with no memories next to a ruined and overgrown escape pod, and she meets a specter named Wallet. Wallet states that they have tried numerous times to escape the sarcophagus, but was ultimately killed before they could do so. However, Wallet is convinced that the Shamasal are the ones preventing his escape, what he calls the illusion, and that killing them is the only way to do so. So, Ouja logically sets out to locate the first shaman. She comes across a Teneba Calagarum, or extractor, which, after killing the first shaman, absorbs the negative emotions of that shaman. These negative emotions most likely being the terror they experienced upon being killed. Ouja meets Qualia for the first time, and she rushes off, stating that the birthing has begun. Our protagonist then finds their way to the container housing Ultros, and after the dark energy is transferred from the extractor to Ultros, she is drawn into the container itself. Ouja finds Qualia waiting for her, and Qualia holds back the growth of Ultros until the Shamazal can initiate the time loop. This process can continue over and over as Ouja hunts each shaman, delivering their dark energy to the entity, but with the Shamazal resetting the time loop after each one. During this journey, Ouja meets the cast of NPC characters, grows Berian plants all across the ship to aid in exploration, and finds remnants of the living network, namely the network statues. She can even discover the last remaining source of living network and begin to reconnect it. If she does this, the next time that Ouja encounters Gardener, he will have discovered the living network's pollinating insects and relay that they told him about Vasa's severing of the network. However, if continuing along her violent path, she eventually kills the last shaman and returns to Ultros. Ouja is drawn into the entity. Qualia is again waiting for her, yet this time there are no shaman left to facilitate the time loop. She laments that Ultros in demonic form will be unleashed and that her power cannot hold back its growth. The two have a fierce battle. Ouja is victorious, yet Qualia pleads with her to not let Ultros be released and uses the last of her vigor to bring the extractor into the container with them. With the Shamazals all gone, the last ability of the extractor is revealed, allowing Ouja to reset the time loop herself. So, just as Ultros is about to be delivered into the universe, or perhaps even after if the player waits long enough, Ouja rewinds the clock once more. She finds Gardener, memory intact from making contact with the living network's pollinating insects. Our friend reveals that he found the extractor, Ouja's sword, and that the network insects have repaired the escape pod, the one that Ouja wakes up in front of at the beginning of each loop. Here, Ouja can make a choice. She can enter the escape pod with Gardener, and the game ends. Ultros is not birthed, and the extractor is taken away from the sarcophagus. Most people see this as a bad ending, but I think that while it is not the best ending, it is still positive in a way, as since we leave the ship with the extractor, no more negative emotions can be infused into Ultros, and therefore it will be on the verge of deliverance in perpetuity. Now, there could be other extractors that we don't encounter, and Ultros could draw more people to the sarcophagus to continue the process, but there is no information in the game suggesting this, and being a Berian invention, I believe that the extractor will only interact with other Berians. This is the best evidence that we have to suggest that Ouja is a Berian, aside from her character design. The second path that Ouja can take at this point is fully reconnecting the living network to each of the Shamazal pods. This can be done before this point in the game, but here you have one last chance to do so. Connecting the network involves physically leading the network insects to the network buds I mentioned at the beginning of the video, which manifest on various Berian plants, the save point pods, the living network statues, and the Shamazal pods themselves. If you're having issue with this, I have a guide that you can watch that goes over each plant and their abilities, including how you can manipulate them to sprout network buds where convenient for you. Check it out if you wish. But once all of the shamans have been connected to the network, Ouja returns to Ultros one last time, and upon being pulled into the container, witnesses a beautiful sight. Now, the container is covered in flourishing plants. Network insects are abound everywhere, and the backdrop is a serene twilight sky. Qualia is waiting here again, and this time Ouja and Qualia hold hands and gaze upon a now benevolent Ultros, shimmering with new colors and shining green eyes. Ultros erupts into a flower of light and the sarcophagus disappears. Upon watching all the way through the credits, we see a falling star crash onto a green planet. So, now that I have summarized the information given to us in the game, through my own interpretations of course, let's break out those trusty tinfoil hats and do some theorizing. Be mindful that these are just my interpretations, and that art can be interpreted in your own way. I'll start with my theories about the time loops, as there are some curious attributes to this process, and I have quite a few thoughts. The plants that we nurture grow and mature throughout each loop. Shamans that have either been killed or connected to the network remain so, and certain NPCs, namely Gardener and Qualia, either have vague memories of previous loops or a complete memory in the case of Gardener at the end of the game. Of course, Ouja's memory persists, even if her body modifications that are not secured by the mnemonic mycelium are reset. It is my theory that time is not truly being reversed, but a snapshot of the environment of the sarcophagus is created, and then a new branch of the timeline is formed. Each of the characters and creatures are rewound to the start of the game and transferred to this new branch of the timeline. Wallet's Spectre remembers the previous loop, but I explain this that he, being a Spectre, is not bound to physical reality anymore and can exist in any version of reality. He is outside the space-time continuum, a manifestation, as Qualia calls him. As to why Ouja, Qualia, and Gardener retain at least some of their memories, I believe Qualia can because, being a Berian with myochorial physiology, she is physically related to the plants that make up the environment. Gardener is the most in tune with nature of the whole cast, and I believe his oneness with the environment psionically connects him to it. This also explains why he is the only character in the game who can actually speak to the network insects, and why, even before the living network is brought anywhere close to him, the network insects are drawn to him. It is after he encounters the network insects that his mind begins to sharpen dramatically, eventually remembering the details of previous loops, much like Ouja. Speaking of Ouja, well, I have a whole section regarding my theories on her that I will discuss next. But before we get to that, I want to state that it is my belief that there have been no time loops before Ouja's awakening. I believe this to be the case because to initiate a time loop, one last dose of dark energy has to be infused into Ultros using the extractor, and we find the extractor presumably where the Shamazal had left it. It couldn't have been used before and found its way back there because we always find it in the place where we left it in the last loop, save for the end game after we acquire the ability to execute the loop ourselves, as Gardener states that he found it and brought it to us from this point on. No, I believe that it has not been touched since the Shamazal last used it. There's also the detail that the extractor latches itself to us, so it cannot be used by just anyone who finds it. It chooses its wielder. Qualia was not even chosen to wield it, it seems, as she is surprised and dismayed that it wasn't her that it attached itself to. As for why the other characters express that they are trapped, I don't believe this is because they are experiencing time loops, but because their minds are manipulated by Ultros. Wallet in particular seems to have been the most severely affected by this, as he instructs Ouja to do Ultros' bidding by killing the Shamazal to release the demon. Now, let's talk about Ouja herself. As a background to my theory about her, let's discuss the very thing we see when starting a new game. That is an object resembling a moon, revealing it to possess an eye, and that eye shining as we are pulled into it. There is other eye symbolism found throughout the game, such as the various eyes found throughout the Infinity Pool, the third eye found on Berians and Gardener, as well as the Kakelman fruit, among many others. A single shining eye is an ancient symbol, most widely seen today as the Eye of Providence or the All-Seeing Eye. But the symbol of an eye has been used in various cultures dating back to at least the ancient Egyptians. The eye is well known to symbolize enlightenment, knowledge, and transcendence, a link to God or to the universe as a whole, which may be the same thing depending on different beliefs. Near universal symbolic aspects of the moon are the repeating phases of life, birth, life, and death, over and over again in perpetuity. An excellent analog for the idea of the infinite. Now let's refer back to the amnemion we discussed towards the start of the video, and specifically the last line which I said we would return to. The third eye will shine from the Chokmah of Ein Sof. We already established that Chokmah of Ein Sof means something akin to wisdom of the infinite God. This is what I believe the moon with the eye represents, the Ein Sof, the infinite God peering into the world of the game and into our own. This leads us to the crux of what I believe about Ouja, so brace yourselves. In the opening cutscene, in true psychedelic fashion, we ourselves, the humans on Earth playing the game, are pulled in by the Ein Sof to the universe of Ultros and inhabit the body of Ouja. The Ein Sof is giving this universe one last chance to persist after the Berians misused their connection to Ultros and potentially brought an end to all things. A literal Deus Ex Machina. In my opinion, this explains everything about Ouja's character, why she doesn't remember anything about the Berians despite certainly being one, why she can be led to believe that killing the shaman are the way to completing her objective, and why she reawakens at the time that she does, long after her escape pod has become overgrown and overtaken by the plant and fungal life on the sarcophagus. As to where Ouja's body actually came from, well, I believe that is spelled out for us rather plainly. She was a Berian whose ship crashed into the sarcophagus at some point in the distant past, perhaps escaping the destruction of Berian society on her place of origin. And she was presumably killed upon impact, leaving her body as an empty vessel. Her character design is unlike that of the shamans, or any other Berian that we see in the artwork, so we can assume that she held a more unique role in Berian society. Qualia refers to her as a sojourner. Sojourner means a temporary resident or a visitor, according to vocabulary.com. A strange name considering that none of the other characters are able to temporarily visit to the sarcophagus. However, if she can intuit that there is another being, us, the humans behind the controller, inhabiting this Berian body, the name makes a little more sense. I interpret this as being distinct from the other visitors, the NPCs, because they are residents. Due to their inability to leave, they have made the sarcophagus their new homes and even changed their respective areas to better match their nature. I think this is perfectly in line with the other meta-narratives this game presents, which, unfortunately, I don't know if I'll be able to get to all of them in this video. There is one loose end to this theory that comes to mind, and that is that there is a room very close to the start of the game that has monuments to each of the shamans. In this room, there are 7 intact monuments. However, there is an additional one which is broken, implying that there are in fact 8 shamans. I imagine this has fueled the theory online that Ouja is the 8th shaman, coupled with other evidence you can find on SEG314's Reddit post, again, linked in the description. I do have an explanation for this, and that is one of the Amnemion memories that clearly originated from Qualia. This one relays, I meditate on their words, searching my heart. It brings me closer to the barrier, to the binding. They told me I was the key, the one who unlocks. I am Qualia. I am one of them. Them is implied to be the other shamans, as we can deduce from her other Mnemosyne memories. I interpret this as Qualia recalling that she is a shaman, yet she was chosen to remain out of stasis to help facilitate the time loop if the need arose. Her mind is still warped by Ultros, and she lost some of her memory as to what she is to do, yet she fights to retain some fragments of who she is and what her purpose was. So my theory is that Qualia is the 8th missing shaman. So let's finally get to what the true ending of the game means, and my theories about the nature of the Ultros Entity. In the post-credits scene, after the true ending, we see a falling star land on a green planet. It is never outright stated, but combining some of the clues we discussed before, we can make a hypothesis. Once the sarcophagus disappears into a flourish of light, it is sent back to the very beginning, crashing into Beria and being the start of this whole history involving the entity. A paradoxical time loop, as SCG-314 puts it. Harkening back to the first Mnemosyne memories that we talked about, and the first of the healed memories, the healed memory depicts a figure very similar to Ouja falling from the sky, and the Mnemosyne talks about a vessel crashing. And within the impact site, they discover the entity, unified as we see it before the flower of light envelops the sarcophagus. Another Mnemosyne found in Pantheon of the Stars recounts a myth from the stars, a tale of a long-forgotten saint. They sent us the first mother, an empty potential about to be birthed into existence. But it was greeted with short-sightedness, reincarnated as fit and proper but never aware, dictated from beyond by blessed ignorance and idle hands. Ouja is clearly this saint, being the catalyst for the redemption of the entity and upholding the cycle of rebirth. She had a hand in sending the entity to the Berian peoples in the first place. It also should be stated that in the game's original soundtrack, the main theme of the game, the song that plays over the title screen, is called Ouja Saint. In the bad ending, the sarcophagus and Ultros are left behind, with time continuing on as normal. In the good ending, we see that the entire history of the Berians, from the introduction of the entity all the way through the disappearance of the sarcophagus, was all set in motion by the actions of Ouja during her journey. Perhaps in this new loop, the Berians will have a chance at being more responsible with the entity, a new branch of the timeline where they can enter an even grander state of civilization. Or maybe it is a perfect loop, and these characters, people, civilizations are all doomed to repeat this cycle forever. I am leaning towards the former, however, because since we do have two options to end this story, that proves there is a multiverse of possible timelines and outcomes. However, that is up to your own interpretation. Ultros is merely a vessel with the power to either grant the universe a new life or to consume it all in a black void. It is an analog for nature itself and for the world at large. What we put into these things is what we get out of them. If we abuse our environment for long enough, eventually it will course correct and become uninhabitable. It will persist, grow, and once we are gone, it will flourish without us. If we responsibly tend to our environment and learn to coexist with it, we can reach greater heights than we could have ever imagined. This is one of the central themes of environmentalism that the game projects. Karmic cycles are another, showing that in the good ending, Ouja's actions of connecting the living network brought enough good karma and energy to Ultros to reverse its corruption, and in my opinion, giving the Berians another chance at doing the right thing when they encounter the entity for the first time. But that leaves one important mystery that I still want to address. Why did connecting the living network change Ultros at all? We know it was connected until Vasa severed it, and that happened long after the entity had already been fully corrupted. So the network didn't ever keep it from being corrupted. Well, I believe that reasoning is twofold. First, we see that by growing new plants across the sarcophagus and connecting them to the network generates good energy, or karma, intrinsically. This is evident by the green energy that is released when we make new connections. The abundance of new connections available through our actions of invigorating the environment helps this process. And that leads us to the second reason, our own actions that we take through Ouja. We have chosen to learn how the plants behave, how to nurture them, and essentially became one with the ecosystem to make this possible. Our choice to do so, breaking the fourth wall, just as I theorize happened to us in the opening cutscene, are the true reasons that Ultros is able to be redeemed. We have to make the choice to better the environment, and so it is because of us, humans behind the controller, generating enough positive karma that the entity can be rid of its corruption and possibly even give the Berian culture another chance. So that was my narrative summary and lore theory video about the brilliant Metroidvania Ultros. If you made it to the end, I sincerely wish upon you an abundance of healthy crops for your next harvest. And it is because of you that I have the motivation to keep making these videos. Please leave a like, and maybe even subscribe if you found what I put forth here interesting. If you have other thoughts and disagree with my analysis, I want to talk about it in the comment section. I try and respond to every comment as soon as I can. I have several other scripts in the works and even a super secret second channel that I'm working hard on. So I hope to see you around in the future. If this video gets enough attention, there are plenty of other topics regarding Ultros that I would love to cover. So please let me know about that in the comments as well. And until next time, stay psychedelic.